Welcome back, everybody, to Photography Tips and Tricks, your show for gear tips, inspiration, anything that you need to take your photography over to the next level. My name is RC, and this week we're going to talk a little bit about noise and HDR portraits. What do I mean? Before I start talking about that, let me tell you we're sponsored by Kelbytraining. Kelbytraining is the place for you to go to learn from the world's best photographers. Hundreds of classes, hundreds of topics, right there on kelbytraining.com. Now, let's talk a little bit about noise. And this came from a comment from Chris. So Chris asks, I always look at the ESIF data, and sometimes the photographer chose to use an ISO above 100 to 200, for example, 800, where I would still have used 100 to 200 ISO. Sunsets and forest, for example. I know that when the light is bad, clubs, pubs, that you go up with the ISO to keep the shutter low, but why would one push up the ISO when using a tripod or when there's enough light? Chris, a lot of that has to do with f-stop, right? So let's say that you're in an environment where you're trying to take a picture and you want to be able to use a specific f-stop. And the f-stop is the one that you're actually the most concerned with because that's the one that controls the depth of field. So imagine if you're in an environment and you have something that sits in the foreground and you have something that sits in the background. Let's say I'm going to use your sunset for an example, right? If you're shooting a sunset, chances are you're going to want to set yourself up nice and low. You're going to want to be able to get a little bit of foreground. If you want that stuff to kind of be in focus, you're not going to be using something like f2.8 or f4 or any of that stuff. You're going to want to go a lot higher. When you do that, you're going to get yourself into a situation where you're shooting at, let's say, 100 ISO, f16, and you could get to a part where you're going to run into a wall, right? On aperture priority, your camera's only going to be able to hit about 30 seconds of a limit in whatever exposure that it's doing. So by having a super, super low ISO and having a really high f-stop to cover your depth of field, you might not necessarily get there. You might not get the shot. So to do that, what you would do is you would counter that by increasing that ISO, increasing the ISO from 100 to 200, 300. That's going to open up a little bit more latitude on the shutter and let you get the count that you want. So that could be one reason why somebody does that. Another reason that I would shoot at higher ISOs is if I were doing a bracket for HDR. Now, somebody down here had pointed something, and I figured we'd tie both of them up. Somebody had said something about shooting HDRs in portraits. So they said, all right, well, they wanted to be able to shoot maybe a quick tip on how to do your HDR portrait and what was the model to do and what was the configuration that worked best. So HDR in portraits, also something that I work with ISO. So what I'll do is whenever I'm doing portraits in HDR, I'll go ahead and I'll tell the person, all right, listen, hold still. I'm going to be taking a series of pictures. There's going to be 9 of them. And I want to make sure that I get them right. And I make them actually sit through 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Imagine having to have somebody sit through 9 exposures where it's like 30 seconds. Please don't move, don't move, don't move, don't move, don't move, don't move. Very uncomfortable, right? So you don't want to necessarily do that. So in an instance like that, what I would do is I would raise the ISO. A lot of the times I'll work with 800, 600, 1600, 3200 ISO, and I'll work with high ISO shots. But that puts us into a position. What happens when you take really high ISO shots and you need to be able to get rid of some of that noise? Well, these are a couple of things that we could talk about right after the break.
Fuel. Written by top authors and trainers, Fuel Books offers friendly, straightforward instruction and innovative ideas to power your creativity. Fuel Books, designed to inspire you.
Welcome back, everybody. RC here for Photography Tips and Tricks. Now, we've imported a series of images, right? And what I did was I wanted to talk about the concept of noise. A lot of the times I'll shoot on really, really high ISO in order to be able to capture a moment. I'll do that on the HDR side if I want to be able to do a portrait of a person. I'll also do that if I want to make sure that I capture a shot and I don't necessarily want to work in kind of noise treatments. What I'll do is I want to be able to get as much camera data as possible and not have to worry about noise reduction. So here's a shot that I did, right? So I have a shot of our director, Arnaldo, right? And if you zoom in here, you'll see he's got quite a bit of noise, right? So there's a lot of noise that's there. Now, obviously, I could go inside of Lightroom and under detail, I have the option to be able to bring in some of that noise reduction. And it's not that bad. I mean, considering the fact that you're shooting at 6400 ISO, I think it did pretty good. Noise reduction does a pretty decent job. But instead, what I told Arnaldo was, hold still. I'm gonna do a series of shots of you. 1, 2, 3, 4. Did a bunch of shots. Then I took that into Photoshop. Inside of Photoshop, I opened all of these as individual layers, and you'll notice he moved a little bit, obviously, right? He's gonna move around, but I'm not really all that worried about it, right? Inside of here, I can shift click all of these layers and then click on this top option right here, which lets me auto align the layers. So by clicking on auto align layers, it'll take all of these layers and it'll put all of these layers together. See? Now, once they're together, it'll look like this, right? I didn't want you to necessarily wait for all of this, but you'll see something really interesting about all of this is pay attention right here on the brick, right? Watch what happens as I turn off and on these layers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Noise is actually random. You'll never see noise in the exact same spot twice, right? So in instances where you need to be able to capture something like this and you don't want to use noise reduction, what I would tell you to do is set your tripod down, set up a high ISO, make sure you're on a tripod. Don't run into the same problem that I have here where Arnaldo was moving because I was, actually he wasn't moving, I was the one that was moving around. So if you need to get a shot, nail it down on a tripod, high ISO, and take multiple, burst that camera. Take as many shots as you can. Line them up here as layers. Once you have them as layers, single click, shift click all of these, right click, and convert that into a smart object. Once you have that set as a smart object, what I want you to do is I want you to work with the smart object itself and set a specific mode for it. So all of these images are gonna get mashed up into one singular smart object, right? We'll go ahead and, if you don't have Lightroom, if you're not a user of Lightroom, what you would do is you would go into the file menu, you can go to automate, and then you can go into load files as a stack. And what that does is it lets you specify how many shots you want to be able to load up, right? Then at that point, you would just single click on the first one, shift click on the last one, and you'd be pretty good to go. So inside of here, we have everything now set as one smart object. Now, if you don't have Lightroom and you haven't done this open as layers, you could always just go inside of here, go to File, and then under here, you have Automate, and then, or actually under Scripts, you want to go in here and select Load Files as a stack. This will let you go and browse for the files that you want to, load, and then you can just go, all right, well, I have those 10 files. These are the 10 files that I want to load, and then that would load them up as individual layers, rather than you turn around and open up one layer after another after another. It'll stack them up, then you can get and you can automate, you can align them, you can convert as a smart object like we just did. And under here, once you have the smart object set, what I want you to do is I want you to go under this, I want you to go to Layer, I want you to go to Smart Objects, and you're gonna go to this section here called Stack Mode. And then under Stack Mode, what you wanna do is you wanna go into Mean, right? You click on Mean, this will go ahead and this will process a little bit. And now it's done. So just to kind of give you guys an update on this, watch. This is this setup right here. Let's focus right here, which is where we had the problem, right? There's our problem. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, and I'm gonna match all so that this zoom in location is matched with this zoom in location. So now you see this was the problem before, that's the problem after. Done. Before, after. So this gives you a great way for you to be able to combat any kind of noise by just shooting more than once. Shoot multiple shots, load them as layers, smart object, and then give it a stack mode of Mean. So that'll take care of any kind of noise problems. Now, on an HDR side, a lot of the times, what I'll tell people here is just to go over to on HDR, and in an HDR, what you wanna do is you wanna make sure that you shoot at a high ISO, right? And then what I'll do is I'll take all of these exposures and merge them together right? Make sure that she's standing very, very still. I'll merge them as an HDR, and then what I'll do is I'll take usually like this middle exposure that I have here, and I'll mix that with a layer. A lot of the times this will give me a result that'll look a lot like this. So now I have an HDR, but then I'll take one of those layers and I'll blend that back in. If you want to see some of that stuff, make sure you take a look at Kelbytraining. Kelbytraining has got a great class that's coming up on HDR and HDR portraits. So that hopefully answers a couple of questions for you guys. Now, contest time. Let's go ahead and go into the contest page. What I want you to do is I want you to go to kelbytv.com. At kelbytv.com, I want you to scroll, find the episode that we're dealing with here, and scroll all the way down to the bottom, all the way down to the bottom. At the very, very bottom, leave your name, leave your email, leave your website, leave us a comment, right? One of you guys is going to win Peter Reed Miller on sports photography. It also happens to be the Peach Pit Book of the Week. So make sure you go to peachpit.com/KelbyTV. You could save 40% on this off of this ebook. So we're going to give this away, and we're also going to give away Exposed by Michael Clark. If you want to be able to see inside the life of a pro photographer, does a lot of adventure shooting, this week you get to have 2 books. So hopefully one of you guys is going to enter, one of you guys is going to win. That pretty much sets it up for this week. So thank you very much for stopping by, and we will see you guys next week here on Photography Tips and Tricks.